Buddy. So yesterday I was examining through maps and I stumbled upon this one, which is probably one of the best maps that I've ever seen, and probably for you as well. It is basically the North American map of different accents and dialects, and it splits it up through 8 regions and actually through cities as well. So there's this so much information about this. I'll try to give you a generalization. So beginning with region one, you have the Canadian accent, which is in pink is the English Canadian. This is pretty generic, and the words like harbor and color, you have the U inserted, just like the British accent and the British wording. And but also in this red portion, this is like where the indigenous dialect is. So you got a lot of indigenous influence and coming from their accents, and it's rural and isolated enough to have its own identity from the rest of the Canadian accent. As you go further east, you'll find yourself in the French-speaking area, where you got cities like Montreal, Troy, Riveries, and Quebec City, which obviously has a French language, but it's also still in the same country as Canada, so that's basically what makes it unique. When you go to the Far East, you'll find yourself in the Atlantic seaboard. This is where like your old lobster fisherman is going out on a cloudy, rough Atlantic day. Kind of has that rough Atlantic accent, but also is from Canada, so has its own identity there. And at the easternmost point, you got the city of St. John's, which actually is called the Irish Newfoundland accent, which is has influence from the Atlantic dialect, but also has a lot of Irish influence as well. When you go further south, you'll find yourself at Region 2, which is Northern New England dialect. And basically, in Eastern New England, this is where the R drops, and you say stuff like, I'm going to pack the car by the harbor. And cities like Boston, Portland, and Bangor are cities in this region. So this is pretty stereotypical. And then when you go further northwest, there's this other side called the Northwestern New England dialect, which probably has some influence from the French speaking Canadians and the generic Canadian accent. When you go further south, you'll find yourself in the North region, which basically kind of winds its way from New York to South Dakota. And I'm from this region, so it sounds pretty general to me, but for other people it might sound different. Like for instance, I say pop all the time, and I say like an kind of more pronounced, more like a sheep. And this is more like a Rust Belt industrious kind of region. But there's also transport from the Atlantic Ocean through the Great Lakes into the Midwest. So yeah, it pretty much has its own identity. When you go into Region 4, of course, you find yourself in the greater New York City dialect, which has a lot of Italian influence. I know somebody from this region, and it's definitely pronounced from North or any other region in the U.S. This is also stereotypical for like your business New York men or your finance people. You know, people always under stress, and also your blue bloods that go to the Long Island for vacation. Even south of that is Region 5, which is the Midland accent. And you can see right away that the Atlantic Midland kind of has its own identity, but it's still part of this region. You know, it kind of goes from Philadelphia through the breadbasket of the U.S., like Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. Um, so this is basically not north, but not south either. The only exception is St. Louis, which kind of has its own corridor and has more in common with the North dialect because of its history. Words in the Midland dialect can definitely pronounce from like the North, such as instead of saying wash, you say warsh in the Midland. I know somebody from this region, and you can tell that he does definitely has a different identity in terms of dialect. And then south of the Midland, of course, it's probably one of the most classic American accents is the South. And there's so many different subregions, um, given the large swath of land and history that the South has had. Um, I was in the South last September, and it's definitely different from the Midland and the North. Um, in fact, even in Northwest Virginia, you'll definitely have that Southern accent. And then there's the Lowland South, which is probably the more classic, more historic kind of Southern accent where people talk more slowly. And even when you go to the deep South, like South Carolina and Georgia, you have the classical Southern where the R is dropped. The second largest subregion of the South is the Inland South, which is probably not as stereotypical, but definitely Southern, probably more like a hillbilly kind of an accent. Um, Definitely in touch with the Southern culture and dialect, but slightly different from like the lowland, more deep South kind of a dialect. You've got like the down east and Outer Banks in eastern North Carolina, which I've seen it in a video, and it's pretty different from the rest of the South. You can check it out, but it sounds pretty radical. Further south, you got historic cities like Charleston and Savannah, which kind of have their own identity. It's probably just more historic. Like I said, you could look it up, but you probably have a general sense of what it sounds like. Probably the most notorious city in the region is New Orleans, which has a clash of so many cultures. Um, they got so many different dialects. In fact, in the downtown, you actually kind of have a New York dialect. Around it, you have the lowland South, of course, but also peripheral New Orleans, and then Mid City and Saint Bernard Parish, which I don't exactly know what that sounds like. And of course, you got the Florida region, which has North Florida and South Florida. North Florida probably still has some southern influence to it, but Southern Florida has more influence with like, the Caribbean and even retirees from like New York and Boston. When you head further west, you'll get to another broad region called the Western accent. Not too pronounced here. This kind of your more basic American accent once again. However, like for instance, San Francisco actually has a more of a Midland dialect than a Western dialect because cities has a kind of different identity than the rest of the West itself. And also El Paso kind of has the same situation. It's not exactly West. It might even have some Southern influence, but also it could be by Mexico where the Spanish speakers are. So it probably has a mix of different dialects that have its own identity, which is most relatable to the Midland dialects. Anyway, the last region I want to discuss is the North Central region, which is most common to Canada, and people kind of tease Minnesota for saying their O's and Minnesota, and you can see most of Minnesota actually has this dialect, but also like North Dakota, northern Wisconsin, and Michigan's Upper Peninsula have this dialect. I know a lot of people from this region, and they definitely have a different accent than like the North does. Just because they say A and they just say like their O's differently, probably most notoriously. So there is a general sense of the dialect map of North America. If you want to look at the website, it's ashman.net. There's so many cool features you can check out. For instance, if you like click on Colorado, you can see the different sources from people that live there and how their accent sounds on YouTube videos. So there you go. I hope you like this informational video. This has been Matt Picks.